I mean, it's good in the sense that you guys will hopefully have a lot of takeaways for today. And I think that's what makes like tournament poker so beautiful is that like ICM strategies can like look very drastically different from chip EV strategies. And ICM strategies are also extremely sensitive, right? Like everyone's stack could be the exact same, and you can have like one person's stack on the table that shifts from like 20 into like 10 big blinds, and now like a bunch of people's ranges like look different. So it's extremely complex. It's something that even like, hey Sanjay, like the best of pros like debate and argue in because it's like there's the actual strategy, but there's like what is actually feasibly implementable. So my goal with this is to give you guys like some broad stroke like general concepts and at least understanding what you should be doing with your stack size, especially against other stacks, as you think about ICM throughout different phases of the tournament, but then especially against different stack sizes. Okay, let us jump in today. So the agenda for today is just going to be at a very high level, just covering what is ICM, understanding what risk premium is, and how to kind of like really think about risk premium and what that means for you and the decisions that you need to make at the table, when to start considering ICM, and what are the key adjustments that we start making in ICM. So in particular, we'll start to look at like when do we want to flat in certain situations and do we not want to flat? When do we start shifting our strategies? And then how do we defend the big blind properly in ICM situations? And I would say these are probably kind of some of the scenarios that people who aren't ICM aware will make the biggest mistakes. So that's why we look at these situations. So first, what is ICM? And it kind of stems from this main problem, which is in cash games, a $1 chip is worth $1. And that's very intuitive, very easy, very simple to understand. In tournaments, the value of one chip varies dramatically. It varies by who has that chip. If you're depending on the size of your stack, it varies depending on a few other factors that we'll look into. So figuring out what your stack is worth in terms of dollars is actually quite complex. But knowing that information is very valuable in determining how you should be, when you should be applying pressure, when you should be willing to put chips in the middle, and when you should be very, very protective and in survival mode. So what ICM is effectively a mathematical model for determining this amount. So what is the value of your stack in dollars? However, this formula and this model is like impossible for you to calculate in game. So that's why we start to look at concepts like risk premium and ICM pressure, because these give you a better heuristic for actually making real game in-game decisions. But just understand that like these are based off of this fundamental model, which is ICM, for determining what is the dollar value of your stack at any stage in the tournament. So with that being said, what do you guys think are the factors that impact ICM? Yeah.
I guess like short stacks or how many people are close to busting for pay ladders.
Yeah, so payout structure, right? So like what's the payout structure, what phase of the tournament we're in, potentially, so are we close to a bubble? And then I think you said like
short stacks.
So stack sizes, yeah. More generally speaking. Yeah. Anything else? I mean, that covers basically most of them, which is, so stack sizes, stage of the tournament. I say number of entrants here. It's kind of a offshoot of, with the payout structure, but basically, being post bubble in 1,000+ person tournament, where like, let's say 150 places are paid, you're still very, very far from the final table. Whereas being post bubble in like a 50 entry tournament, you're like actually probably you are in the final table, or let's say maybe it's like 100 entries, and you're very close to the final table. So that's why number of entrants might matter. And then payout structure, whether it's like a regular payout structure, top heavy payout structure, flatter structure, etc., has implications on what your stack is going to be worth. What ICM doesn't take into account is player skill, position, or anything like table dynamics. So at the end of the day, like we still have to play poker and understand like our opponents, like who is ICM aware or not. It just takes into account the value of your stack, assuming all players are equal effectively. What is risk premium? Have you guys heard of risk premium before? No? Anyone want to take a stab at what risk premium is?
I think it's about the risk you have to lose in your stack and how much extra how much extra equity you need in order to make the call more profitable.
Yes. So basically, where ICM is kind of is I mentioned like impossible to calculate in game. Risk premium is expressed in a percentage, and basically means how much more equity do we need compared to just like the regular pot odds in order to want to put chips in the middle or make a call. And so this is a much better metric when it comes to actually determining how we should play our hand or make decisions. So for example, like if we're in a spot where normally, the pot odds dictate that we would need 30% equity to make a call where somebody, let's say, bets on the river. Now, if we understand that given the formation or the scenario of where we are in this tournament, our risk premium against this player is 10%, then we actually need 40% equity to call. So that means the threshold for which we start to call and want to risk putting our chips in the middle is much higher in ICM scenarios. And this is generally built up the concept that in ICM environments, the chips you lose are worth more than chips that you gain. So that's why we're a lot more careful with putting chips in the middle, because we don't stand to gain as much when we, let's say, win this pot versus if we lose this pot and maybe get bumped down from like a middling stack to like a short stacked, etc. So risk premium is generally expressed, it's a relative measurement between two stacks. So you have to be, this is why in ICM environments, you have to be extremely aware of every single person's stack at the table. And what your risk premium is versus different stacks is going to depend on what your stack size is relative to them. And then also, what are like generally, what are the stack sizes across the table. So when you see it, if you've ever clicked through on GTO Wizard, they call it like bubble factor instead of risk premium. But generally you'll see like risk premium in this sort of like matrix, where like you've got all the positions against each other, you've got stack sizes listed under. And generally speaking, like whenever you're playing against a bigger stack, your risk premium is generally going to be higher because they can bust you. So like they can bust you, which is obviously really crappy. You play in the tournament, then you could just be completely out of the tournament. When you're playing against a stack smaller than yours, your risk premium is lower. And then when you're playing against a similar stack, then you've got like a medium or so risk premium. Something that I see from like, let's say players who aren't as ICM aware, but kind of generally know if they're like a big stack in a heavy ICM environment, let's say you're close to the final table bubble and they know that they understand that you generally get to play a little more aggressive. They don't factor in, like when you're first in chips and you're playing against second in chips, you actually still have like a reasonable amount of risk premium and you don't want to be playing in big pots. So they'll get into trouble where like you've got first in chips playing against a massive pot and against like second in chips, because first in chips just thinks I just get to be aggressive against anyone. Doesn't matter their stack size, but this is spots where we generally want to still be careful. And you'll see this a lot as well, especially if you watch any kind of like final tables with like a lot of pros, is the big stacks will tend to kind of like soft collude with each other because they're very disincentivized from playing pots against each other, because the bigger pots that they play, they're just kind of like redistributing more EV to the rest of the table. So you'll see a lot of this like soft collusion between like big stacks in like ICM scenarios. Any questions on risk premium?
So from what we see in the chart, the max it can be is about 19%, and the minimum it usually is about 1%. Is it right to read the chart that way?
This was just a random example I pulled. So no, you can definitely see risk premium higher than 19%, and we'll go through a couple examples. And then sometimes, you can be risk premium at zero, which is basically just play pure chip EV strategies. Like if you're like right at the start of the tournament, for example. So another concept is basically risk premium is also a measure of ICM pressure. And I like the general concept of ICM pressure because it's a more simplified way of thinking what are the general adjustments I want to make. So instead of thinking like, okay, my risk premium is 6% and I need to add that on top of like, every like call or like the pot odds of whatever decision I have to make. Just understanding generally if you're under low, medium, or high ICM pressure. So if you like generally somewhere between 0 to 5% risk premium is low, meaning we're generally going to be playing close to chip EV strategies, don't need to make too many deviations. Once we start to get from 5 to 10%, we want to start to tighten our ranges slightly and folding marginal spots. Anything 10% plus, like you're going to start to see some pretty strong deviations from chip EV strategies. So these are like the higher extreme scenarios. So instead of necessarily thinking exactly what level of risk premium I'm under, just think about like, okay, how much ICM pressure am I facing? And again, that's going to be relative to like what stack you're playing against. Like, can this person bust me? And what are the consequences of busting here? Are we far off the money so it doesn't really matter and I can rebuy and re-enter whatever? Or like, is the consequence of busting is like now we either go from making $0 or like min cashing? So first quiz here is we're on the bubble with 4 left. Only 3 are paid in this tournament. What's up, Billy? There's a chip leader in the cutoff with 60 big blinds. There's 2 players with 6 and 8 big blinds that both folded. The cutoff jammed all in. And then we're in the big blind with 30 big blinds with ace queen on. What do you guys think that we want to do here? So we've only got 2 decisions. We got a call or we got a fold.
We're folding.
Okay. You think folding? How many people think folding? How many people think calling?
Kind of also depends on the tournament size in terms of what's the price structure for third and fourth. I mean, what's basically
Sure.
the entry price and all that.
Yeah. But assume it's like a normal payout, like something like, just assume it's like 50, 30, 20%, something normal as opposed to like a super top heavy, like a 90% pay. Yeah.
I think fold.
Okay. Sanjana, you were going to say
I would call.
fair? Yeah, I mean, ace queen off is a fantastic hand. And I would say, and like, under chip EV, like I think this is a very clear call that I feel like most players would make. I would say even under ICM or people who are not ICM aware, like they would also make this call, and I see it happen all the time. So the correct answer here is to fold. And the reason for that is the consequences of us busting, like we basically are guaranteed to make money here. Like we're basically guaranteed with 3 players paid, there's 2 very, very short stacks. We're almost guaranteed, and this is a situation where like under ICM, like we just literally make money by folding. Like we make money by folding. So sure, we're ahead of their range, but if he has a hand like king 10 or something, like we're still only like a 60% favorite, and 40% of the time we're out of this tournament where we go to like being guaranteed to make, let's say it's a $100 buy-in and you're guaranteed 2x your money, guaranteed $200 to $0. So that's a really, really bad consequence here, which is why like our risk premium is super high and we do not want to be putting the money in here and like losing 30 big blinds. And also, again, we said the chips that we lose, like when we lose this, like we're out of the tournament and now it's worth, like we get $0. Whereas sure, we can double through and like we'll have a higher chance of winning, but not proportionally to like obviously like losing and being out. Like gaining 30 big blinds doesn't mean we're a lock to win this whole thing, even though we would be the chip leader after this. So that's why this is a scenario where we've got a really great hand, and for chips, like very certainly would be a call. We're almost certainly ahead of like most of the hands in their range, but almost probably every hand in their range because they're probably not jamming with aces and kings and queens. So, but this is still a situation where we're meant to fold.
Does it matter if like you have a different hand in this situation? Like would you have like jacks or something?
I mean, jack starts to become close. I didn't look up like a very specific range here, but like I know people who would still fold like queens here, right? Like I wouldn't even necessarily think that that's correct under ICM, but like people just think, like if it's like a big final table where like, you know, let's say it's 100K buy-in or something, where like, you know, it's like 200K min cash and like whatever, 600K per person, something like that. Like, yeah, it largely depends, but it's just sometimes like not even worth it. Like even with queens or jacks, and they just have like, they're gonna shove here a lot with just like any ace, right? So any ace against like ace 3 off against like our queens is still what, like 30% or something. So it's just really, really risky, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see like jacks and tens just being like folds here. Yeah, if you've got aces, like probably you're gonna be calling kings. Probably, I mean, at least probably meant in theory too, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see people folding anything but aces here. But great question. Any other questions here? Okay, so next quiz is, when do you guys think we should start taking ICM into consideration? At what amount of the field left in play? So the answers are 50%, 35%, 25%, or near the bubble. So I'll just go by like show of hands. So how many people think it's at 50% of field left? Okay, one. How about 35% of field left? 0. 25% of field left. Okay, most it looks like 5 or 6, and then near the bubble, 2. Okay, so this is great because the answer to this question is actually 50% of the field left. So this really highlights that people are not really considering ICM until like much later than they should, and we're gonna look at a couple range comparisons. And I listened to like a podcast recently where like these researchers kind of did an entire study where they ran basically like a bunch of like AI bots playing different strategies. Where like one and they ran like thousands and thousands of tournaments against each other. So like one was just playing pure chip EV strategy like the entire time. One was basically playing chip EV until roughly 50% of field left and switching to like to ICM. Others were playing like chip EV and then down only at like on the bubble or on the final table, they would start switching to ICM. And basically the ones that switched to ICM the earliest at like 50% basically outperformed in terms of like dollar value and ROI. And to no surprise, the one that played chip EV the whole time performed the worst. Even though the one that played chip EV purely from the beginning actually placed first, second, and third the most out of thousands of tournaments, because they're just optimizing for accumulating as many chips as possible, which will lend to you probably winning the tournament more often, but was min cashing a lot less, making deep runs way less, so their overall dollar ROI was way, way, way worse. So let's actually take a look. So we're gonna look at this risk premium by tournament phase and see how it impacts a few charts. How it fluctuates throughout stage of the tournament. So on the y-axis here is the risk premium. So it goes from 0% to like basically 30% at the top. And then the bottom is number of players left. So this only accounts for, in this case, 41 players are paid. The furthest most on the left is 82 players left, so about 25% of field left. And then we're gonna look at how risk premium impacts small stacks, medium stacks, and large stacks with respect to them playing versus the chip leader. So this is all with respect to them playing versus the chip leader, which they'll have the highest risk premium against because they're all could potentially bust when they're playing against the chip leader.
When we say chip leader, it's just a table chip leader, right? It doesn't really.
Yeah, so table chip leader in this scenario. So yeah. So I'll ask you guys first, which is with 25% of field left, who do you guys think has the highest risk premium versus the chip leader? So short stacks, mid stacks, large stacks, or you think all stacks are the same? What do you think?
I was thinking C.
You think You think large stacks? Okay. What? Anyone else? What do you guys think? I see.
I'd say D, because anyone who's less than the chip leader would have the same risk of busting if they go up against him.
Okay. So you think all stacks share the same risk premium? Anyone else think A or B? Yeah, Billy.
I would say B,
Okay.
just because you're almost kind of getting into the money, or like not, or like out of the money.
Yeah, we're starting to get close, 25% of the field left. So you think B, because potentially they're like, they're potentially more at like risk of like busting if they play. All these players are at risk of busting, but maybe the consequences of them are worse because they can potentially fold to the money from here. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take a look. So the correct answer is, I know it's kind of hard to see, but we've got three dots down there, where the green is basically the second in chips versus the chip leader, so a large stack. I'm actually colorblind, so I don't even know. Is that purple? Is the second one?
Yes.
Okay, so purple, and then I'm guessing that's blue.
Blue.
Yeah, so purple and blue. So as we can see, the large stacks here have the highest risk premium. It's actually at 10%. So for those who are thinking like, you would actually like. I think most people would be really surprised to even think that anyone could have a risk premium of 10% at 25% of field left. So again, it goes to show how early we have to start factoring in for ICM. But yeah, the highest risk premium is the large stacks. The low stacks don't really have much risk premium at all. They're just kind of in like shove or fold mode. They're kind of far from the money. Like they can't fold to the money in this case, so they really need kind of a double up, and they're just gonna be able to jam most of the hands that they would normally jam against larger stacks. But with large stacks approaching, the value of a large stack, especially approaching the money bubble, is super, super valuable, because when you have that, you get to apply so much pressure. So preserving your large stack going into this money bubble phase is incredibly important. And obviously you don't want to bust. So how about on the bubble? Who do you guys think has the highest risk premium now on the money bubble?
The short stack.
Okay, what you think short stack? Why short stack?
Because everyone's kind of waiting for them to bust in a way.
Yeah, so they're like, everyone's trying to like fold out and wait for the short. They're expected to bust because they have the smallest stacks. So you think that they have the highest risk premium. Okay. Anyone else?
You can still see,
You think it's still C, large stack?
yeah,
Okay, how come?
for the same reasons, because it had the highest risk premium at 25%. It still has the same risk of, if they're up against the chip leader, they could be the one that bubble. Despite the fact that there's so many people before them, or short stacks before them.
Okay.
Whereas for short stacks, I feel like if they're expected to kind of burst first, then the risk premium on them is not that high anyway. So that's how I would see it.
Okay. Did anyone else think differently between A, C? I'll tell you guys, it's not D. It's not they do not share the same risk premium. Okay, well, you think C? Okay. Okay. So it is actually A. A was short stack, right? I think so.
Yeah.
So you can see here, so everyone's risk premium has gone up. And you'll see this where approaching the bubble, ICM pressure grows overall, and everyone's risk premium as a whole has gone up. For the large stacks, it's gone up, but it's now the lowest because the value of their stack is not in min caching. It's about, having a large stack is about like making a deep run and winning the tournament. Whereas the value in short stacks is basically just surviving to min cache. And if they can min cache, that's a huge win for them. You can sneak into the money off of like a couple big blinds, like that's a huge win. So for them, they're very disincentivized from like putting chips in the middle if they can just fold and they're just like a couple people off the bubble. So they've got the highest risk premium versus the chip leader, and basically versus like everyone, because everyone covers them effectively as a short stack. So that's where it now flips when you approach the money bubble.
So
Yeah.
I know we lump everybody under 20 as short. Does
Yeah.
it change for, let's say, somebody who's placed 42nd, 41st, 39th, 38th, like in terms of chip position? So like 5 big blind, 4 big blind versus, I don't know, 10, 15.
Absolutely.
Is there a big difference? Like
Yeah.
huge difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, like it's all relative, right? So you could have like a bunch of stacks between 10 to 15 big blinds at your table. There's like 1, 4, or 5 big blind stack. Like so they clearly become the short stack. And now like those 10 to 15 big blind players like almost kind of play as like middling stacks.
Sure.
Yeah, essentially.
So the one that is the shortest, will they have the absolute max
They will.
ICM?
Yes, the one who is shortest will have the absolute max ICM pressure. I mean, obviously the middling stacks are all still very disincentivized. Like everyone's very disincentivized to play because they were all waiting for the short stack to play or to bust. But they're like the short stack will have the most, especially relative to other short stacks. I would say if you are like literally the bottom, like you actually it's a scenario where like you actually start to experience a little less ICM pressure, right? Because like again, you can't just fold. You like it's impossible for you to fold and just like make it into the money. But like if there are a couple like 8 big blind stacks and then there's like 4 big blind stacks, like those 8 big blind short stacks would experience like the more ICM pressure than the 4 big blind stack because they have to jam eventually and hope to double up. Which I guess is probably what you're asking about. Yeah. Okay, last one on this chart, which is who has the highest risk premium versus the chip leader immediately post bubble. So everyone's in the money now. The bubble has burst. Who has the highest risk premium?
I'd say the larger stacks because now they're playing for like higher payouts, so they gotta keep their stack to get deeper into the tournament.
Okay. Anyone think differently?
Would it be mid stacks? Because I guess the value of your chips themselves are in accordance to the payout structure now. So it's like more important to ladder up. And so it's like the two sizes that are on polar ends are the ones kind of dictating action. Whereas maybe you're not incentivized to go in all the time.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good guess. Well, we'll take a look. So immediately post bubble, it actually ends up being the large stacks again. So basically the short stacks, how it works is they just experience like 0 ICM pressure now. They're just like, they're gonna basically play pure chippy V ranges, start jamming, just try to double up because the potential of them making a deep run is very, very low right now with their stack size. The big stacks will experience the most ICM pressure for similar to reasons. It was Terrence, right?
Oh,
Tristan, sorry. What Tristan was saying, which is, yeah, like the value of your stack now here as a big stack post money bubble is making a deep run and potentially taking down this tournament. So busting immediately post bubble is pretty shitty. I think you will still see a reasonable amount of risk premium on the middle stacks as well, but it's going to be higher on the large stacks versus the chip leader. And then you'll see this pattern where risk premium and ICM pressure rises again, generally speaking, as you approach the final table bubble. So it kind of does this sort of wave as you get closer to the final table, or throughout the tournament to the final table. So that now being said, now we kind of know how risk premium and how ICM pressure sort of fluctuates throughout the phases of the tournament. So what do you guys think are our key adjustments given this? So now we know roughly when we're experiencing it. So when we are experiencing really high risk premium, really high ICM pressure, what adjustments should we be making? So generally, do we want to be doing more flatting, more limping, more 3-bet folding, more slow playing? What do you guys think?
C for sure.
You think C for sure. How come?
So obviously, if you're deciding to fold, it's because you're narrowing out your range. You're kind of tightening up your range to account for ICM. And if you're 3-betting, you're kind of forcing the pressure onto the one that you're 3-betting, so that they're less incentivized to kind of continue playing the hand. So
Yeah.
that's how I would say.
Yeah, so the correct answer is C. We adjust. Our primary adjustment is by doing a lot more folding and 3-betting. And so we're going to look, we mentioned how you should start to adjust for ICM even as much as that 50% of the field left. So this is like a range comparison. This is chippy V strategy versus 50% of field left. And this is us in the button versus a cutoff open at 50 big blinds symmetric stack. So everyone here is at 50 big blinds. But you can see a regular chippy V strategy. So with no ICM at all, we're raising 10.4% of the time. We're calling 18% of the time. And at 50% of the field left, where most players, I would say, are still just playing a chippy V strategy, you can actually see how dramatically a difference there is, where already we're starting to raise a bit more. We're raising 25% more, and we're calling a lot less. So we're calling like 33% less than we would. And again, so you're starting to see that exactly what we saw as the adjustment, which is we're folding more, and then we're 3-betting more. And you can see the kinds of hands that we're starting to 3-bet more are going to be really more like blocker oriented. So having like an ace-x or a king-x in our hand just goes up way more in value. Suited connectors start to go really down in value because you're not going to be playing post-flop as much. in ICM scenarios because the same way that we're incentivized to do more folding, we get to 3-bet because we don't expect our opponents who initially open to be doing as much calling. So they're going to be pushed into these nodes where they're going to be doing either more 4-betting or folding. So our 3-bets become more valuable because we're just going to be generating a lot of folds. Or when we're 3-bet bluffing, we just have an easy decision where we're going to fold when they 4-bet jam on us. And we don't have to necessarily navigate many post-flop like tricky scenarios. So that's an example at 50% of field left. We're going to look at a more dramatic scenario, which is on the money bubble as a range comparison. So in this situation, we have 27 big blinds on the button. And you can see there's a distributed stack size across the top. I think average stack is something like 35, 40 bigs. And even though we cover the cutoff, which opened off 21 big blinds, that their stack is still 80%, 70, 80% of our stack. So we still have a reasonable amount of risk premium versus this player. So consequently, you'll kind of see the adjusted strategy here, which is, for chip EV, we're basically playing no raises except for with aces, but we're either jamming or calling, and it's a 20% continuation range, 10% jamming, 10% calling. Whereas, and sorry, that's not 50% left, that's on the bubble ICM. So on the bubble ICM, like calling goes down dramatically, and actually I looked at a couple sims of this. Like in some cases, like you'll actually see calling at like almost like 1 to 2%. So this one's pulled from GTO Lab, and you'll only see it from like hands like maybe Ace 10 suited, Ace Jack suited, Ace 9 suited. Some of these like decent like suited aces that don't like kind of like too good to like raise as a bluff, but like also too good to fold. So we're still seeing jam around the same percentage, but you're seeing a lot more raising. So we're starting to build a lot more like of a raising rate. I mean, significant. We're going from basically 0 raises to 15% raising. So it's a lot higher. And you'll see that like where the raises are coming from is a lot of like blocker driven stuff. So you'll see all of these offsuit aces that we weren't even within range in the chip EV strategy are now heavily within this ICM strategy. And these hands play terribly post-flop, like when you have ace 3 off, ace 4 off, ace 6 off, ace 7 off. But it doesn't matter because the main thing is that we're not really going to be going post-flop most of the time. It matters that we have an ace in our hand because that means they're going to be 4-betting us less. They have less of the aces, the ace king, the hands that are going to be 4-bet jamming into us. So our 3-bet's just going to get folds more often, which is why the blocker properties become incredibly important. And when it comes to us 3-betting.
3-betting is pink color?
Yes, 3-betting is. I don't like the color scheme in GTO Lab because it's very hard to differentiate like 3-betting from calling. And for me, actually, these colors are like very similar. But yes, it's like pink. And if anyone else can tell, like what color, like green is it? Green. Yeah. So green is call. So hopefully you guys can see the colors better than me. But yeah, 3-betting is pink. But yeah, you can see basically all that like offsuit ace X, like a bunch of like the suited aces, basically, like low suited kings as well are going to be doing a lot of 3-betting.
You mean pink or purple?
Which color?
The light pink.
Light pink. Yeah, that's raising. That's 3-betting. Yeah.
Because purple is
Yeah,
jam.
it's just
Purple is jam. Yeah, that's the distinct one. So we looked at 50% field left. We looked at the bubble, and we'll look at one more range comparison on basically. I think it was like basically final table bubble. So this is like probably the infamous example where maybe a lot of you guys saw on TV, where basically I think there were. I can't remember how many left. It was 10 left. Yeah, so I think literally like final table bubble. And then big stack, Joe Srock, I think he has like 90 big blind opens. And then we've got somebody with about 20 big blinds. So Tamayo in middle position, I think. Yeah. Or like, what's that? Yeah, like low jack. And he just open folds queens. So this is like a really big deviation and adjustment. Because obviously they're in a huge ICM spot where there's millions to play for, and he snap folds queens. He doesn't even consider like 3-betting or flatting. So let's take a look at if he was correct. Actually, I'm curious what you guys think. Do you guys think this is the correct fold?
He's like right outside the bubble.
They're the final table bubble. Yeah, 10 left.
What's the payout?
So these are the great questions. These are the pay structures. So I think everyone's already locked up 800,000. So making the final table is 1 million. So it's a 200K pay jump, 10 million for first. Yeah.
Can I see the chip counts again? One more. One more. So he's. Three. Just two people shorter than him?
Yeah, Gonzalez is shorter than him, and then there's one person with like 5.5 big blinds in the small blind. 3 people shorter than him. Latino has like just under 20 bigs.
And the fact that he went on to win it, I think is that one, right? I think it's correct.
Yeah, so spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen this, he ended up winning the whole thing. He won $10 million. So
Yeah, sorry for the spoiler.
Okay, so how many people think this is the correct fold? Okay,
Hurts.
so 3 people think it's correct fold. I'm assuming everyone else thinks it's not a correct fold. So we'll take a look. I mean, we'll compare first. So this chip EV strategy in this scenario is you're meant to be playing 12.5% of your range with like a healthy amount of raising, something like probably like 4%, 5% raise, and like 8% call. So we can see in the final table ICM scenario, you have basically no calls, but queens is still a clear raise. Jacks is a raise, and tens is when you're kind of indifferent. And then you like all of these like suited stuff, again, like these are your bluffs. So it's just taking like your like suited ace X and king X to mix in bluffs. Because the rest of your range is like super strong here. So obviously he chose to deviate even further from this, and he just had a strategy that he went to, like came in his mind, and when he went to play that day, he's like, maybe he's folding everything. I don't know if he would have folded aces and kings there too. Who knows? But yeah, like he just knew he was gonna fold, and there is a lot of value as we see in ICM scenario. You just make money by folding, and it worked out for him because he ended up winning the whole thing. But theoretically, we are still supposed to be raising queens there, but it is a very, very, very tight range, and you can see the difference where we have 0 calls here on the final table bubble compared to what a chip EV range is supposed to look like. Okay, so the next topic is going to be defending out of the big blind in ICM scenarios. So I think most of us know that like generally out of the big blind, we're going to be defending a ton, especially in chip EV, as much as like 85% of our range, especially against like late position opens. So do you guys think at the final table, should you defend the big blind wider than usual, tighter than usual, same as chip EV, or randomly? So I'll just see by show of hands, how many think wider than usual? Okay, what about tighter than usual? So about half, 60% think tighter than usual, same as chip EV? No, I guess everyone else randomly? Okay, we got one for randomly. So to no surprise, it is tighter than usual, which most of you got right. So you'll see a theme here generally in ICM is we want to be playing a lot tighter. So let's take a look at one specific spot.
Does that depend on the stack size of the person that opens?
It does. And so when I say, at the final table, you're going to experience very high risk premium in general. And obviously the higher the ICM pressure, the higher risk premium, we want to be defending tighter. If you're the big stack and you cover whoever opens, then you're going to have lower risk premium, so you can be playing a bit closer to chip EV strategies. Sorry, I'm just going to check time. Okay, we got it. So here's an example where we're at the final table. Average stack is about like 35 or so big blinds. So, and I'm comparing it to like 2 spots where like ICM pressure is still relatively high in both scenarios, but final 3 tables versus like final table. But final 3 tables, like this is our defending strategy in a multi-way pot where under the gun 7 opened, and then the button called, and we're in the big blind. And probably is something way tighter than most of us are executing in game, because this is like a 25% continuation strategy from the big blind, where I would guess that a lot of players are probably continuing like 50% plus. So probably twice as many hands as they're supposed to. Not only because it's multi-way, and we're generally supposed to be continuing a lot tighter multi-way, but 2 because of the ICM factor here. But then now you compare that to final table, and it's like half of that. So a very, very dramatic decrease where like, and like I'm still like making a bunch of mistakes myself where like I'm probably not folding like king 9 suited or like queen 9 suited, like a lot of these like nice suited hands. Like so many of us are just used to calling basically any suited hand out of the big blind, but you guys just see like how much tighter we are meant to play, and then we're also being quite aggressive here. Where actually most of our strategy out of the big blind at the final table is going to be raising or jamming, especially with those suited aces. So again, the blocker properties go way up in value. Any questions about this?
So,
Yeah.
is that because it's also multi-way and not really? So I'm assuming that let's say the button didn't call,
Yeah.
we would be calling the king 9, queen jack, jack 10, jack 9, etc.
Yeah, so it's a factor of both. It's multi-way and it's high ICM, but this more or less highlights like, I think the more important thing is like highlighting like how much more we're folding here at 3 tables versus final table. And obviously you compare this to like chippy V versus final table would be like super dramatic difference. Yeah. So who can actually apply pressure in ICM scenarios? This is kind of like a very high level sort of chart for you guys to think about that kind of like takes into account a lot of things that we discussed today. But generally speaking, like who to target is gonna, and who you can apply pressure to is gonna largely depend on like your stack size relative to all the other people on the table. So as a short stack, the general best targets are gonna be other short stacks that are, really don't wanna bust, especially if you cover them slightly, and you generally wanna avoid big stacks. Medium stacks is you want to target, again, short, basically anyone that you cover is kind of the main theme, and you don't want to play against anyone that covers you, or at least you're going to have a much higher risk premium against anyone that covers you. And then big stacks, they're going to really want to target medium stacks, and in some cases, like really actually kind of want to avoid doubling up short stacks, because the presence of short stacks allows for them to put a lot of pressure on medium stacks. So even if you have, again, a chippy V call, or even maybe a very clear chip EV call as a big stack against like a really small like short stack, sometimes even just like folding and like not doubling them up is still going to be beneficial to your overall strategy as a big stack, because you get to put so much pressure and just steal so many blinds away from all the other players. And then again, avoiding big stacks where like I've made some punts like deep in tournaments where like I'm playing like a 100 big blind plot against like another big stack, because I'm like, oh, I cover them a bit, so I still get to do like check raise like my like sets on the flop, even if it's not like not the actual nuts, and then try to like win a big pot where we're not meant to be doing that, and we kind of really want to like again like soft collude against like other big stacks. Last couple of things before we wrap up is just, it's really important to understand who is ICM aware and who is not, because at the end of the day, like we still got to play poker, and we have to think like, a lot of the adjustments we make is with respect to our opponents also making adjustments to their strategy. But if you feel like you're playing against people who are playing like clearly chip EV strategy, or like raising way wider than they should be, or 3-betting way wider than they should be, then it means that maybe we don't necessarily need to fold as tight as we do, but like maybe you're choosing some hands to throw into the 3-bet portion of your range, or you're still calling the big blind a little bit wider than it should be in ICM, just because you think your opponent's maybe raising super wide. So I think it's really important to pay attention to who really cares about the payouts and who doesn't. I think the unique thing here at V Club is obviously we've got like our seasonal leaderboards. So there's some players who really care about cashing, because they get like the difference in points between like min cash and like actually winning the tournament is actually not that big. So like cashing just to get those leaderboard points is actually pretty valuable. So pay attention to who are those players, and then you can maybe exploit them when you're close to the bubble, because maybe they're even folding tighter than they should be in regular ICM, because the consequence of like winning on that leaderboard is actually quite high for them. And then obviously who doesn't care about payouts at all, and who's just like playing whatever. So Kenny's not being himself, but and then like obviously we got to just be very aware of these things. So as the final takeaway, this is like a little ICM cheat sheet. But essentially, what risk premium is generally just needing more equity to call, So if generally you're getting 30% of pot odds, you have a 10% risk premium against the player, then you need 40%. So very high level stack strategies, but when you're a big stack, you can apply pressure on basically anyone that you cover, but still be careful against other big stacks that represent a large portion of your own stack. Medium stacks generally kind of survival and then slow chip accumulation, and then short stacks are going to be jamming and folding a bunch. ICM timing, I think this is the big one, and like honestly, I just learned this myself probably like 3-4 weeks ago. Is that like starting to actually implement ICM ranges as early as 50% of field left is going to make a pretty big difference on your overall ROI in tournaments. Whereas before, I was probably doing it at like maybe 25 or 30%. And then stop flatting. So again, you're going to want to, you're a lot less incentivized to go post flop when you're in these ICM scenarios. So you're going to be folding or 3-betting a lot more. And blocker values go way up when in your 3-betting range. And then big blind defense, super tight at final tables. Survival matters more than picking up a few blinds. And then understand your reads on players and exploit certain players appropriately depending on how they view ICM or whether they're just completely ignorant to ICM. So that's it. Any questions?
Is there a way for us to calculate risk premiums based on scenarios? Like how we can calculate equity based on number of outs?
Not that I'm aware of. I think you just look at like what's nice about GTO Wizard is like they'll literally have the chart in any scenario, and you can just like pull it up. And I think if you just like look at enough of them, you start to understand roughly what amount of risk premium I have. So like maybe I'll know roughly I have 10 to 15% risk premium against this player on the final table bubble. But no, not that I'm aware of at least. Maybe there's some.
Yeah, so how do you generally do it? So let's say you're playing big blind and you know you're playing against 40, so you just assume a 10, 15%, 20% risk premium, something like that?
In my head, I just think like, do I have high, medium, or low risk premium, right? And then how do I want to adjust if I have a high risk premium, then I'm going to be doing a lot more folding. So, or like, and maybe I'll think about my range and I'll think about the boundaries and I'll be like, high risk premium, I want to be 3 to 4 pips tighter, let's say. So like it's if I would have called with ace, I don't know, ace 5 off in the big blind, then maybe I'm calling like ace 8 off plus now ace 9 off plus or something like that. Yeah. I think it's a great question. I think different people will find different like simplifications for yourself. But I think just practice like looking at them. If you look at the spots in GTO Wizard, you look at their ICM like ranges, and you can find the bubble factor. Cool. Any other questions? No? All right. Then we'll wrap up here. Good luck today, guys.